everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I really hope you're all doing okay and having a great day and an amazing week. My name is Effy and today we have a makeup and mythology story. We are telling the story of Jason and the Argonauts, and I'm warning you now, it's a long story. It's a bit longer than some of the other mythology stories I've told, so just be prepared for that. The palette I focused on today was the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. I'm not sure if I like this look. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments section. I'm going to start this video with an apology. I probably pronounce everything wrong in this story and that's not good. I don't mean to do it. I don't mean to be offensive. I do Google pronunciations. I just forget them. I'm really sorry. But hopefully we can get past that. I'm going to keep this intro short because it's already a really long story. But if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. And if you like my content, please consider subscribing. I put up 2 videos a week and it is always makeup content. So if that sounds like the type of thing, then this is the place for you. Makeup Mythology comes up once every 4 weeks on my channel. And if you are just here for Makeup Mythology, I will leave a playlist linked in the description box for you where you can find all of the videos I've done so far. But other than that, I'll let you enjoy the video. So, as usual with a lot of these Greek stories, we're actually starting before Jason was even born. And we're starting with a man called Peleus and his half-brother Aeson. Now, Peleus was the son of Poseidon, who is the god of the sea, I think, or basically all the waters. He's a main Greek god. And Aeson was the son of Chryseis, who was the king of Iacus. And when Chryseis died, the rightful heir to the throne was obviously Aeson, his son. However, Peleus had other ideas and he decided the best course of action was for him to take the throne and for him to imprison his half-brother. He also decided that in order to make sure nobody else took the throne from him, he was going to kill all of Aeson's living relatives. And sadly, over despair of the situation, Aeson's wife, Alcimede, sadly died giving birth to their son, Jason. And Jason was very quickly sent away to make sure that he wouldn't be killed. And Jason was sent away to the mountain of Pelion to live with Hera. Now, Hera is a centaur, which is a mythological creature. They are half man and half horse, I'm pretty sure. And Hera is actually mentioned in a couple of stories. I'm pretty sure he's meant to be a well-known guiding figure for a lot of people. So Jason went to go live with him. Meanwhile, Peleus was a little bit anxious. He thought that one day someone was going to come and take his throne away from him. And so he went to go see the oracle at Delphi. Now, we've heard of the oracle before. They sort of have powers to see into the future. So he went to go ask, what's going to happen? Is someone going to take my throne? And the oracle warned him to be fearful of the stranger with only one sandal. And that was all she told him. Unknown to Peleus, this was actually going to be a form of revenge from the good old revenge queen herself, Hera. Hera has a knack for coming up with great ways of punishing people. And this was going to be one of them, and actually it was a pretty good one. So why does Hera want revenge, I hear you cry? Well, a few years earlier, Peleus had committed a rather serious act, like serious by anybody's standards, not just Hera having her own moment. He had killed his stepmother at an altar dedicated to Hera, which is obviously a terrible, terrible act to commit. But what this meant was that the people in the surrounding area would no longer go to worship at this altar, which meant that Hera wasn't being worshipped, and the gods are a little bit picky about that. They want to be worshipped. That's the whole point of them being gods. So Hera sort of bided her time a little bit, which she's good at doing. She's good at waiting, finding the best course of action to really punish somebody, and then going in for it. At 20 years old, Jason obviously knew what had happened. He'd been told the story of his evil uncle and his father, and he decided he was going to go out and get his throne back. And this was when Hera decided that this was the ideal moment to take her revenge, and she was going to use Jason to do it. So Jason set out on his journey, and along his way he came to the river Anaros, and he found an old woman trying to cross, and being the good, kind-hearted hero of the story that we're all used to seeing, he offered to help the old woman, and he actually carried her across the river. And in doing so, he sadly lost one of his sandals, which is exactly the sort of description that was given of the person who was going to take the throne from Peleus. What Jason didn't know when he carried on with his journey was that he had actually just helped the goddess Hera, the queen of the gods, across the river. She was in disguise, and she basically did it so that he would lose his sandal, I'm pretty sure. Now, back in Iacus, Peleus was obviously very unaware that any of this was happening. He'd received the prophecy quite a few years ago. Jason's 20 years old at this point, and so he's actually having a celebration in the name of his father, Poseidon, and this is the moment when Jason turns up and demands the throne. Obviously, this surprises and sort of throws off Peleus a little bit, because there's a stranger here with only one sandal, and that can only mean one thing. He's the person who's going to take the throne from him. However, Peleus has had many years to think about what he's going to do, and so he agrees to give Jason the throne if, and only if, he can bring him the golden fleece. And now for this story to make sense, I'm going to have to just briefly tell you the story of how the golden fleece came to be. And this starts many years before any of this even happened. And once upon a time, many years ago, there were two children, Phrixus and Helle. And these two children were the son and daughter of King Athamas and the cloud goddess Nephele. However, the king was seduced by the queen of Thebes, and he took her as his second wife. Now, the queen was rather jealous of his two children, and somehow managed to convince him that if he were to sacrifice his two children to the gods, the famine that was ruining their land would go. And he agreed to this and decided he was going to sacrifice his two children. I don't get it either, I'm sorry, it's a strange time, people just be sacrificing their children all over the place. Now, during the sacrifice, a winged creature appears, and he is wearing the golden fleece, and he has come to save the children, and he takes them to the land of Colchis. Now sadly, Helle actually falls off the animal's back and into the ocean and drowns during the journey, so unfortunately only Phrixus makes it to the land of Colchis, and the king is welcoming, allows him into his kingdom, and actually Phrixus ends up marrying the king's daughter. Now, as a thank you for his hospitality and for obviously allowing him to marry his daughter, Phrixus actually gives the king the golden fleece and sacrifices the winged creature to the gods. I don't know how that's a thank you to the winged creature, but everyone seems okay with it, so we'll just skip past it. Some time later, the king hears a prophecy that a stranger is going to come and take his kingdom, and he's also going to try and take the fleece, and he also hears that he's going to be betrayed by a family member. Now this is where I truly don't understand the logic, because the king decides that the stranger must be Phrixus, which, I mean, that stranger is married to your daughter, so how is he a stranger? And also, he gave you the fleece. If he didn't want you to have it, he could have just kept it. But anyway, he decides that Phrixus is the stranger who's going to take his kingdom, so he actually kills Phrixus, and he also nails the golden fleece to a tree, and he also has it guarded by two bronze-hooved, fire-breathing bulls and a dragon, you know, just for good measure. And that's where the fleece is. That is where Peleus has just sent Jason to go and get it. Get me the fleece, you can have your kingdom. That's the agreement that they made. I'm not sure if Jason truly knew the story of the fleece in full, but somehow he agrees to this, and that's what our story is about. It's him going to get the fleece. Now, he does decide that it's going to be a very long journey and he's going to need a ship. So, thankfully, the best ship maker in all of the world just happens to be hanging about with nothing to do. So Jason asks if he will help him by building a ship. And this ship maker is called Argos, and Argos agrees. And so Argos, with the help of the goddess Athena, who is the goddess of, I think it's like strategy, but also crafts, and she's just wisdom and smart, and she's great, and she's my favourite. And so with the help of the goddess, they create the ship. And also, as a gift, Zeus gives them Dodoa, which is a piece of wood from the god's enchanted forest. I think it can speak, and it also has the gift of the oracle, so it has some future seeing ability, and so they attach this to the ship and it's there to help give them guidance about the best course of action on their journey. Now Jason needed a crew, so he decided he was only going to accept the strongest and bravest and best men that Greece had to offer. Now thankfully Greece had a lot of these types of people, and the crew actually ended up being 50 people in total, and it includes some names we've heard before. One of which is Hercules. We've done the story of Hercules. He is known for his strength and his agility. Argos, the shipmaker, obviously also joined the crew. Castor and Polydeuces, I think that's how you pronounce it, also joined the crew. They were brothers. They were amazing boxers. They were also really good at taming horses. I guess that's a good skill to have. Orpheus, who we've also done a story on, he joined the trip as well. He was a gifted musician to the point where people would come and listen to him and cry at his music or be happy based on his music. And obviously there were plenty of other people who were strong and had their own special skills who Jason thought were going to be useful on the journey. And so they set off. And I think it's safe to say they were a little naive. I think a lot of them thought this was just going to be a fun journey, something to do, pass the time. It was all going to be fun and games, a bunch of lads out on the town, that sort of situation. No, quite a few of them actually wouldn't end up returning from this journey. It was a very long, hard trip, and there were obviously some hurdles in the way. You can't just go out and get the fleece. It's not what happens. But nevertheless, they thought it was going to be a jolly, and the first hurdle they encountered was when they stopped at the land of Lemnos. This isn't really a hurdle, it just delays them a lot. This was an island inhabited only by women, and this came about because the women had angered the goddess Aphrodite. Now the goddess Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty, love, she's meant to be gorgeous, you know, all that sort of things. And the women had angered her because they weren't praying to her. I told you the gods are iffy about this. And the way Aphrodite decided to punish the women was to give them all horrendous body odour, and it actually led to all of the women's husbands leaving, which angered the women, and so they ended up killing all the men on the island. So they were living on this island by themselves, just the women, and they had a queen, and everything was good, and then all of a sudden 50-some men turn up. So they welcome them with open arms and presumably open legs, because a lot of children are born out of this, including Jason's 2 twin sons that he actually had with the queen, of course. So they kind of ended up staying at this island for a few years, I think. And I can only imagine that a few years on, one of the crewmates is like, hey, weren't we out here to do something? And they're like, oh yeah, the fleece, we should probably carry on with that. Yeah, we should do that. That's the only way I can imagine that conversation going. So they ended up setting off and going back to their journey after a few years. This place they stopped off was the land of Delonis, and they stopped here to get some supplies. The king was very welcoming, very kind to them. However, the king did forget to mention one thing, and while the men were getting some supplies, a bunch of 6 armed creatures came up and tried to attack the ship and kill the men who were guarding it. But thankfully, one of the men left guarding the ship was our good old friend Hercules, and he was able to hold off the monsters long enough for Jason and the rest of the crew to return and help them kill the monsters. Now this was a genuine mistake by the king. He didn't mean to like set a trap for them or anything like that. It was an honest mistake. So Jason and the crew got their supplies and set off. However, at some point during the night, there was a bit of confusion, it was dark, they got a bit lost, and somehow they ended up making a complete U-turn and coming back to the island. And as it was night time and, you know, there was a bit of confusion, the king actually didn't recognise the Argonauts and their ship, so him and a group of men went out to attack the people coming onto the island because they didn't know it was Jason, they didn't know that they were friends, and a battle began. And unfortunately, in the confusion of the battle, the king sadly lost his life, and in the morning when the light came, they realised what had happened and the Argonauts felt terrible about it. I think that the islanders sort of realised it was an honest mistake, and they had a very grand funeral for the king, and then the Argonauts went on with their journey. And while they were sailing along the coast of Mysia, I'm going to go with Mysia, Hercules noticed that his oar was broken, and so he was going to go ashore and create a new one out of the wood on the island, and he took his squire with him. While Hercules was creating his new oar, his squire went to go fetch some water for him, and unfortunately he came across a water nymph and she bewitched him, and he followed her into the water and didn't come back out again. Now Hercules was obviously very attached to his squire. I'm assuming they were friends or something, because he was heartbroken when he couldn't find him, and he decided he was going to stay on the island looking for him and trying to find him. And this caused a bit of a problem because the men on the ship, some of them wanted to wait for Hercules because he was an invaluable asset to the crew, obviously, and some of the men wanted to just carry on with their journey. And this sort of created a bit of anger amongst the crew, which isn't what you want. You kind of want a harmonious crew when you're on such a long journey. Now thankfully, one of the minor sea gods, Glaucus, arrived to sort of fix the situation, and he informed the crew that it was the will of the gods that Hercules was to stay here and fulfill some tasks for the gods. And upon hearing this, Polyphemus decided to stay with Hercules and help him with his tasks, but it meant the rest of the crew was free to carry on with their journey without feeling bad about leaving Hercules because he was doing the gods' work. So again, the men carried on with their journey, having lost unfortunately 3 of their crewmates, and they later came to the land of King Amycus. Now Amycus had a pretty bad habit of challenging everyone to a fist fight, and obviously when these men arrived, that's what he did. It's like, let's have a fist fight. And well, the best man for the fight was Polydeuces, because he was one of the twin brothers who was a very talented boxer. And so he took up the offer and he won. He killed the king, and the islanders weren't really happy that they'd just killed their king, so the men, the crewmates, were actually driven back to the Argos and they left. Next place they reached on their journey was Thrace. And well, they came across a pretty strange sight. They came across an old blind man who was being tormented by 2 winged creatures. He was just sat trying to eat his meal, and these winged creatures were attacking him, ruining his meal, and just overall giving this guy a hard time. So obviously they had to step in and help. And to thank Jason, the old blind man told them that his name was Phineas and that he was originally a seer and he could see into the future originally. But he was punished by Zeus for telling too many of Zeus's secrets. And the way Zeus decided to punish him was 1, make him blind so he can't see anything, and 2, send the harpies to ruin his food every single day so he could never eat again. The harpies were the winged creatures that Jason and his friends had just scared away. Phineas agreed to tell Jason what lay ahead on his journey, providing he helped get rid of the harpies. Now, 2 of the men in the crew were sons of the north wind god Boreas, and this meant they could fly. And so it kind of became their task to get rid of the harpies. And they decided to lay in wait to kill the harpies. However, Iris, who was the sister of the 2 harpies, intervened, and she said that they would never harm Phineas again. They would leave him alone. Just please don't kill my 2 sisters, I guess, was the conversation that went down there. And so Phineas obviously thanked the Argonauts and said that the next task that lay ahead for them was very dangerous. And in order to pass through the land they were about to encounter, which does have a name but I cannot pronounce it, they had to release a dove to see if she had safe passage between the 2 rocks, and if she did, it was safe for them, and if she didn't, they had to wait. And so the men carried on with their journey, and they did listen to the warning, but there was no way they could have known just quite how important the warning was. Because the land that they came to, which again I'm not pronouncing the name of, was a very, very thin strait of water with 2 gigantic rocks on either side, and these rocks would crash into each other all the time, and therefore it was very difficult for any ship to pass through. And so obviously knowing the advice that they had just been given by Phineas, Jason released a single white dove, and they all kind of held their breath waiting to see if this dove was going to make it through, and luck was on their side because the dove did. She flew straight through, unharmed, absolutely fine. So they were very happy and they set forward through the 2 gigantic rocks, and it was a very, very close call. Just as they were pulling out at the other side, the cliffs started to move towards each other, and the goddess Athena actually appeared and held the cliffs apart in order to give them safe passage. I mean, I know that the Greek gods, like, it's all made up stories and things like that, but having so many gods be on your side in a quest is surely a good sign. It means whatever you're doing, they want you to do it. So having so many gods and goddesses be on your side is surely a good thing. And obviously now that they'd made it through such a dangerous part of their journey, they were back into smooth sailing waters. And then they kind of had another little bit of misfortune in that their navigator fell asleep at the helm of the ship and fell into the water and drowned. I mean, that's not great news. And obviously now that they didn't have their navigator, they weren't quite as good at knowing where they were going, and I think they got a little bit too close to the land of the Amazons, and Zeus had to send a very strong wind to sort of push the ship away from the land to stop the Amazon women from attacking them. They were also attacked by the Stymphalian birds, and these birds had lethal bronze-tipped feathers. Great. Now the problem here was that these birds were actually the sacred animal of Ares, the god of war, and because of that they couldn't actually kill the birds. The most they could do was just drive them back. And thankfully one of the men on the ship had actually recalled that Hercules had once encountered these birds and had managed to drive them away simply by making loud noises. So they gave that a try and it worked. Thankfully, throughout all of this, only 1 member of the crew was actually injured, which, considering everything that's going on, is pretty good going. And finally, they were starting to approach the island of Colchis, and it was at this point that the goddess Hera recognised that Jason might need some help. And for this, she decided to send Medea, who was the daughter of a king, but she was also a very skilled sorceress. And she was actually a high priestess of the temple of Hecate, who was the goddess of, or Hecate, sorry, and she was the goddess of witchcraft and sorcery and all those good things. And Hera knew that Jason would need Medea to help him both here and when he got back to Iacus. And Hera actually asked Aphrodite to send her son Eros to help make Jason fall in love with Medea. And so Eros was sent, and he made sure that the first person Jason would come into contact with when he got to Colchis would be Medea. And so when they arrived on Colchis, the Argonauts decided they would go to the court of the king, and the king was rather angry, I think you could say, when he found out that the only reason Jason and his crew were there was for the fleece. And the king actually wanted to kill Jason and his crew right there and then, but decided against it because he thought that would make matters worse. And so the alternative was to set them a rather crazy task. The task was that Jason and his crew had to beat the 2 bronze-hooved fire-breathing bulls, and he had to get them to plough a field where they would sow the dragon's teeth, and the dragon's teeth seed things would grow into warriors who would then attack them, and they would have to beat them. Bit of a task, but Jason of course agrees. Why not? But Jason was a touch worried because he kind of knew the only person who could potentially do this task they'd left behind, Hercules. He was probably the best bet for this task, and they had left him, and he was rather angry that they had decided to leave Hercules quite a while ago at this point. He was quite angry about it, but either way he agreed to the task. He needed to get the fleece, he was going to do it. So Medea had made an ointment for him that he could put all over him, and it would stop fire from really getting at him, so he could attack the bulls who were fire breathing. And so he put this on. And she also told him how he would be able to defeat the warriors of the earth, so the warriors that were going to grow from the dragon's teeth. She told him how best to defeat them. And so, armed with a lot of courage and sorcery, he set out on his task, and thanks to Medea's ointment, he was able to approach the bulls without getting burnt alive immediately, and he did manage to defeat them. So he sowed the field with the dragon's teeth, he got the bulls to plough the field, and up rose the warriors. Now the advice Medea gave to Jason for defeating the warriors must have been, don't panic, they're dumb. Because what she told him to do was to throw a rock into the group of warriors, and they would be confused as to who threw the rock, and they would just start attacking each other. And it worked. Now the king was obviously a bit annoyed at this because he didn't actually want Jason to succeed, and he decided that Jason must have had help from one of his family members. But he wasn't able to pinpoint who it was, and so he decided instead of getting angry at his family, he would just kill the Argonauts. And now, suspecting that the king would do something evil, Medea decided to help Jason steal the fleece so that they could get out of there. And the agreement was that she would help Jason provided Jason would help her get out, because I'm almost certain she's the king's daughter. Although when I was researching this, it wasn't mentioned until this point, so I'm a bit like, oh, okay. So Jason agreed that if she were to help him get the fleece, he would take her away, and she wouldn't have to deal with her father. And this is where our good old friend Orpheus comes into it. Now, like I said, Orpheus was a very skilled musician. He played the lyre, and this was going to help because the golden fleece was still nailed to the tree, and it was guarded by a sleepless dragon. So the dragon would not go to sleep. And with the help of Medea, with the power of music and sorcery, they played a song that put the dragon to sleep while Jason was able to get the fleece. And once they got the fleece, they rushed back to the Argo and set sail immediately because they knew that the king would be chasing them as soon as he found out that there was some treachery. And sure enough, once the king found out, him and his son, Medea's brother, set off to find the Argonauts. And this is where things get a little bit crazy because obviously Medea had to help sort of get them out, and this involved killing her brother and chopping him up and putting him in the sea, which is a bit out there, to say the least. And due to his despair at the death of his son, the king actually stopped chasing the Argonauts. However, he did ask Zeus to punish them for the unfair death of his son. And I think Zeus must have been kind of in two minds about this, because Zeus had been helping Jason and his crew this entire time, but obviously he couldn't just not help this guy because his son had been killed rather unfairly. So Zeus did kind of punish them, but as a god he could have punished them a lot more, he just chose not to. And the way he chose to punish them was to actually blow them off course. And he actually blew them towards an island where Circe lived. And Circe was actually the aunt of Medea. However, given that she had just heard about the death of her nephew, she actually asked the Argonauts to leave. And so they did, and they carried on with their journey, and they came to another problem. They were sailing along as they were planning to, and all of a sudden an uneasy feeling sort of came over all of the men on the boat as they started hearing music. And it was very nice music, and it started to pull at their hearts, and all they wanted to do was go to the source. Now, if you have heard Greek mythology before, if you've done a bit of Greek mythology reading, you will know exactly what creature they are about to encounter, but if you don't, they're about to encounter the sirens. Well, the sirens have a pretty, I was going to say a bad rep, but realistically it's a very accurate representation of them, because the sirens are creatures and they appear as beautiful women to lure in sailors from the ocean, and what they do is they play beautiful music and suck the men in, and the men fall in love with them, and then I'm pretty sure they drown the men. Once again, this is where Orpheus is to save the Argonauts. Orpheus played his lyre, and he played it far better than the siren song, and actually was able to break the spell of the siren song because he played well and loudly, and it just sort of took over from the siren song. So, realising what was going on, Jason started to get his crew to row as powerfully as possible away from the sirens, because they're just dangerous creatures to be around, and the rocks surrounding the island were also very dangerous for the ship, so it was kind of important that they got away from it as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, one crew member did not manage to be saved by Orpheus, and he actually fell into the water and started to swim towards the sirens. And like I said, there are very dangerous rocks around the island, and it would often kill a lot of men, so he was kind of expected to die, but all of a sudden the goddess Aphrodite appeared and saved him. Again, another god slash goddess being on their side and helping them with their quest. And from then, the goddess Thetis actually appeared to help them with the rest of their journey. Thetis is a sea goddess, and she helped guide them past a number of obstacles, one of which being a six-headed creature, and the other one being a massive whirlpool, as either one of these would have killed Jason and all of the crew. So she appeared and helped them sort of find their way through all of these obstacles, and she actually guided them to an island where they were able to stop, and this was where Jason and Medea got married, which was very nice. And they carried on with their journey, and as they were approaching the island of Crete, the Argonauts were kind of tired. They wanted a rest, and they thought, well, why don't we just stop on Crete? However, a giant bronze man was there being like, no, sort of fended them off, stopped them going on to Crete. And the only way to kill one of these bronze giants was very specific. You had to rupture the only vein in his body, and this was in his ankle, the back of his ankle, something like that. What an odd way to be killed, but that's how they had to do it. And using her powers of sorcery, Medea created a giant rock to land on his ankle, rupture the vein, and he bled out and died. Lovely. Now, as they were leaving Crete, one of the Argonauts had a dream. Now, in this dream, he had made love to one of the daughters of Triton, and she was worried that she had nowhere to go, and so she advised him to throw his clod of earth. I have no idea what a clod of earth is, but she advised him to throw it into the sea, and this would create an island where she could live and mother his children, and all of their descendants would live there happily forever. And Jason heard of the dream and told him to do it. He said, wait till we're far away from this island, throw your clod of earth, whatever it is, into the ocean and see what happens. So he did, and an island grew from it. And I think this is the story that they tell to explain how Santorini came to be. And that was really the last bit of adventure they had, and they very soon returned to Iacchus. And Jason very proudly handed the golden fleece to Peleus and said he wanted his throne now. And at this time, Jason was very unaware that Peleus had actually killed Aeson. Now, if you remember, Aeson was only imprisoned at the start of the story, so I'm assuming Aeson was killed at some point whilst they were on this journey. And upon finding out that Peleus had killed his father, Jason was obviously outraged. He decided he was going to exact revenge on Peleus, and he asked his wife Medea to help him. And she obviously agreed, and Peleus died as a result of her trickery, because she managed to convince Peleus's daughters that she had the power to return Peleus to his youthful self. She even showed his daughters that she could do this. She got a ram, she cut it up, put it into a cauldron, did some magic on it, and brought it back as a young sheep again. So she showed them she could do it. I understand why they kind of fell for it, to be honest. And so they went and killed their father, which sort of solved a lot of problems, really. So quickly after the king had been killed, Jason took the throne. However, this didn't last long, as the people of Iacchus very strongly decided that they didn't want a sorceress as their queen, meaning Medea. They didn't want her to be queen of their kingdom. So Jason, being again the good, kind-hearted hero of our story that we expect, gave up the throne to be with his wife. He gave the throne to Peleus's son. Fortunately, this was kind of Hera's plan all along. Hera didn't care about Jason getting his throne back. Jason was just a pawn in her plan. She needed to get Medea to Iacchus so that she would kill Peleus. And the only way to do that was to send Jason to Colchis to get her. Not to get the fleece, to get Medea. Jason and Medea went and lived a life of exile, and it was pretty uneventful. However, even the best men can be swayed, apparently, because Jason kind of swayed. Jason had decided he wanted to marry the princess of Corinth, which is where they were living, and even though he was married to Medea, that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to marry the princess. And, well, Medea found out that Jason wanted the princess and decided it was time to fix that, so she killed the princess, but on top of that, she also decided to punish her husband more by killing their 3 young children. And after doing so, she fled to Athens and Jason was left alone. And so Jason's life, which had once been that of a great hero, actually ended up being quite tragic in the end. One day, as an old man, he sat next to the old ship, the Argo, that had got them through all of their adventures, was now just sort of old, decaying, falling apart a little bit, and it was groaning and it was old, and it just wasn't the ship that it used to be. And honestly, the same could be said for Jason. He was old and alone. I think I need to put a gloss on top of this. And as he sat there next to his ship, he asked Zeus for one last favour. He was so tired of living, he asked that Zeus would show mercy on him. And so that's what Zeus did. Zeus snapped one of the lashings, which caused a beam to fall and end Jason's life. I'm actually getting emotional at it. It's a made up story. But that is the story of Jason and the Argonauts. It was quite a sad story there at the end. Whew. Wow. A bit of a longer story than we normally do, but I think it worked out quite well. I don't always want to do long stories, but I have done a couple of longer ones in the past, and so I think I'm going to sprinkle them here and there, just because I know that some of you prefer the longer stories. This is the look we've created. I probably did a bit more than I would normally do, just so that I could fill up the time that it took to tell the story. But I hope you like the look. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments section. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and if you like my content, please consider subscribing. It's all makeup content here. I put up 2 videos a week, and Makeup and Mythology comes up once every 4 weeks, so if that sounds like your type of thing, then this is the place for you. Drop me a comment, let me know what you think of the look, let me know what you think of the story, let me know if you've heard it before, let me know if I told it right. But other than that, I will let you go. Have a great day, an amazing week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.